They say the land remembers everything. The footsteps, the secrets, the promises buried so deep that even time forgets where they're hidden. But sometimes the land talks back. This is the story of Eliot Brandt, a simple man, a farmer, and the last of a long line of men who never left Wisconsin soil. He wasn't famous. He didn't chase dreams, build empires, or break records. What he did was wake up before the sun, feed animals that didn't thank him, plant seeds that might not grow, and return each night to a house too quiet for a man with a broken past. But what Eliot didn't know, what he couldn't know, is that his life was never truly his. It was a thread in a much larger fabric, woven decades before he was even born. And it all began with a box in the attic. Not a storybook attic. No dusty windows with golden light. No mysterious music swelling in the background. Just wood beams, cobwebs, and the bitter cold of early March. Eliot was cleaning out old junk, thinking about selling some of his grandfather's war medals. Money had been tight ever since the market tanked last year, and with no family left around, there was no reason to hold on to ghosts. That's when he found it. A small wooden box, barely bigger than a shoebox. It had a set of initials carved into it, GB, the same as his grandfather, Eliot Brandt. The man who raised him. The man who never smiled. The man who stared out at the cornfields like he was waiting for someone who never came back. Inside that box was a map. And this wasn't the kind of map you find in a book or a store. It was old. The edges were burnt. There were hand-drawn trails, strange symbols, and an X marked at the far northern corner of Eliot's own land. Land he had lived on for over 60 years and never stepped foot in that direction. There were notes scribbled in pencil, almost erased by time, but still barely legible. And one sentence at the top that changed everything. For when everything else fails. Eliot held that map for a long time. Longer than he realized. The cold didn't matter. The attic didn't matter. The silence didn't matter. Only that sentence. What did his grandfather mean by that? What had failed? And why now? Why did this map seem to call to him like a whisper from underground? The truth is, Eliot had stopped believing in mystery a long time ago. Life was hard. Life was simple. Things died. You buried them. You moved on. But that night he couldn't sleep. The map stayed on the kitchen table. He kept looking at it, tracing the lines, comparing it to memory. Something was wrong. Some parts of the property, parts he knew like the back of his hand, looked different on the map. Paths that didn't exist. A structure he didn't recognize. And then it hit him. The symbol near the red X, it wasn't just a drawing. It was the old barn. The one at the edge of the northern field. Abandoned for decades. Half burned in a lightning storm in '82. His grandfather had told him never to go near it. Rotten and cursed, Gerald used to mutter. Eliot hadn't thought about it in years. It was a ghost on the edge of the property. But now, the map was pointing straight to it. The next morning, without even finishing his coffee, Eliot grabbed a flashlight, the map, and a crowbar. The air was heavy with fog, like the land itself didn't want him to go. The path was overgrown, forgotten by time. Each step crackled with frost and dead grass. The barn loomed larger with every breath, its broken frame like the ribcage of some long-dead beast. He paused at the door. His heart was beating in a way it hadn't since the day he lost his wife. Not fast, just heavy. Then he stepped inside. The barn groaned under its own weight. Shafts of light pierced through the collapsed roof, casting eerie beams across the dirt floor. Dust danced in the air, and for a moment Eliot didn't move. It felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not haunted. Just wrong. Like he was standing in the middle of a memory that wasn't his. He followed the map, past collapsed beams and rusted tools, until he found it. A patch of earth, darker than the rest. Recently disturbed. As if someone had been there. As if someone else had the same map. He dropped to his knees. Dug with his bare hands. And then his fingers struck metal. A second box. Same initials. Inside. A compass. A letter. And a key. The letter read, "If you're reading this, you've come farther than I ever did. There are things I never told you, Eliot. Things I couldn't. But it's time you know who we really are. Follow the compass. Trust the silence. And don't let them find it first." The letter wasn't signed. But he knew. He looked around, suddenly aware of how quiet everything was. Too quiet. And in that stillness, Eliot felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Not fear. Not hope. But the unmistakable pull of something unfinished. This wasn't just a scavenger hunt. It was a reckoning. And Eliot Brandt was already in too deep to turn back. Eliot stood in that barn for what felt like hours, the letter trembling in his hands. The key, cold and old, hung loosely from a fragile string. The compass spun once, then pointed true north, settling with a quiet click that echoed far louder in the silence than it should have. But it wasn't the compass that haunted him. It was the letter. The handwriting wasn't shaky like the last note. This one was firm, intentional, as if written long before Gerald's body had begun to weaken, long before the man's silence became his defining trait. Eliot knew every tick of his grandfather's voice, but reading that letter, he heard something else. Urgency, fear, and a regret. Back at the house, Eliot spread everything across the kitchen table. The compass, the map, the 2 boxes, the letter. He stared at them, trying to make sense of it all. But nothing fit. Gerald had never been sentimental. He was a man of few words, fewer smiles, and no stories. Not once had he spoken about family beyond Eliot's father, who died in a tractor accident when Eliot was only 11. And yet this letter, it spoke to something much older. Something buried. Don't let them find it first. Who was them? And what exactly was he supposed to find? That night, Eliot didn't sleep. He sat in his armchair, the letter on his lap, listening to the sounds of the farm. The creaks, the wind, the distant groan of old wood settling. He'd heard these sounds all his life. But now, every one of them felt like a signal. Like the land was trying to tell him something he should have heard years ago. The next morning, he drove into town. It wasn't much, just a diner, a feed store, a post office, and a bar that smelled like the 70s. But there was one place that might help: the county records office. He walked in, greeted the clerk with a tired nod, and asked to see land surveys from the 1940s and 50s. The woman raised an eyebrow but handed over a dusty binder without question. Eliot flipped through the pages, scanning for any anomalies. At first, nothing. Just fields, parcels, owners' names, familiar families, old names, names now forgotten. Then, on a 1952 survey, he saw it. A small symbol near the northern edge of his family's land. Not a building. Not a well. Just a circle. Circled again. Labeled with one word, handwritten in faded ink. Heirloom. Eliot blinked. Heirloom? He snapped a photo with his phone, heart racing. Who wrote that? And why was it on his land? Back at home, he found the compass again. It pointed steadily to the north. Same direction. Same line as the red path on the map. And at the end of that path, somewhere beyond the rotting barn and past the field he hadn't touched in decades, was the old tree. The one locals called the widow's tree. It was a massive oak, split down the middle by lightning sometime in the 60s. Gerald used to tell Eliot to stay away from it, saying it was sick wood. As a kid, Eliot thought he meant the tree was diseased. Now he wasn't so sure. As he prepared to leave, something outside caught his eye. A car, parked just beyond the property line. Dark windows. Engine running. It didn't belong to anyone in town, that much he knew. Eliot stepped outside, staring it down. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly the car pulled away. He didn't like that. Not one bit. Someone was watching him, and they knew he was getting close. But Eliot Brandt had spent a lifetime standing still. This time he moved. With the compass in hand and the map folded tight in his coat pocket, he headed out across the fields. The wind was sharp, cutting across the rows of frostbitten grass. The air smelled like distant rain and something older, something dry and wooden, like a memory on fire. The tree rose from the earth like a monument, its dead branches clawing at the sky. As he got closer, the compass needle began to shake. Not spin, not whirl, but tremble. A soft, vibrating pull, like it wasn't pointing north anymore. It was pointing down. Beneath the roots, a stone. Flat. Carved. Almost completely buried. Eliot fell to his knees and began digging with his bare hands, ignoring the cold. The dirt was loose, recently disturbed. Under the stone, another box. But this one was different. This one had his name on it. Not Gerald's. Eliot Brandt. He froze. His breath caught. The world around him narrowed until only that name existed. Who had buried this? When? And how did they know he would find it? He opened it slowly. Inside was a black and white photo of a young woman holding a baby. Behind them, the barn. Whole. New. Alive. The woman wore a pendant, one Eliot recognized. It had hung from his grandfather's bedroom mirror for years. She wasn't family. Not that he knew of. But the baby had his eyes. Below the photo, a second letter. Not from Gerald. From her. And the first line read, "Eliot, if you're reading this, then your grandfather finally forgave himself." His hands shook. His stomach turned. And 1,000 questions poured through his mind. What had Gerald done? Who was this woman? And why did Eliot feel like the ground itself had just shifted beneath him? He looked up. The sky was darkening. And somewhere, far off in the distance, he heard a car door slam. Someone else was here. And whatever secrets this land had hidden for generations, they weren't his alone anymore. Eliot didn't sleep that night. Not because he was afraid. Not entirely. It was because his mind couldn't stop racing. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. The woman in the photograph. A stranger, and yet, somehow familiar. Holding a baby beneath the old barn. Smiling like she didn't know she was part of a secret that would take decades to surface. That pendant she wore, he remembered it hanging from Gerald's mirror all those years. As a child, he thought it was his grandmother's. But he never saw a photo of her. Never even heard her name. Whenever Eliot asked, Gerald would grow quiet and distant. Some things are better left buried, he'd say. But now Eliot knew better. Things buried have a way of clawing back to the surface. He read the woman's letter again. Her handwriting was delicate, elegant, but tired. The kind of penmanship from someone raised in a time when letters were sacred. The message wasn't long. It didn't tell him everything. But it told him enough. She was not Gerald's wife. She was someone else. Someone he loved. Someone he couldn't be with. Her name was Evelyn. She had lived nearby, just across the river during the war. And she had a child. His child. The child's name was Samuel. Eliot's father. All his life, Eliot believed he was the son of a man who died too young and a mother who passed when he was born. But now, everything was unraveling. Gerald hadn't raised him out of duty. He raised him out of guilt. Guilt for keeping secrets. Guilt for turning his back on the woman he loved. Guilt for choosing silence over truth. But the letter held more than emotion. It held a warning. They wanted what Gerald knew. That's why he disappeared for 2 weeks in 1953. That's why I left. If they find the journal, Eliot, they'll come for you too. They. The word was beginning to take on a shape Eliot couldn't quite see. Not yet. But he felt it. Watching him. Waiting. He took the photo, the letter, and the compass back into the house. Then he opened the second box again, the one from the barn, and noticed something strange. The lining beneath the compass had a tear. A small one. He peeled it back and found a hidden compartment, no larger than a wallet. Inside, a piece of cloth. And wrapped in that cloth was a brass key. Older than the one from the tree box. Hand-forged by the look of it. Heavy. Marked with a symbol he didn't recognize. It looked like a triangle inside a circle, with 3 vertical lines splitting it. A symbol that felt old. Like it didn't belong to any bank or company. More like something secret. Hidden. Cult-like. That night the phone rang. No one ever called Eliot. Not anymore. He answered. There was no voice. Just static. And a faint rhythmic clicking. Almost like Morse code. But he didn't know Morse code. He said hello 3 times. Nothing. Then the line went dead. He stared at the receiver for a long time. Then unplugged it. Something had changed. The discovery had set something in motion. The next morning, Eliot drove to the town library. Not the new one. The old one. The one that barely stayed open. There, among old maps and archives, he asked the librarian, a woman named Fran who remembered his family well, if she had ever seen the symbol. She didn't answer right away. But her expression changed. She led him to a back room. Opened a drawer labeled Private Collections. Inside was a book, leather-bound, dusty, and thick. It was titled Symbols of the Forgotten Societies of the Midwest. There it was. Page 47. The same symbol. The triangle, the circle, the 3 lines. It belonged to a group known as the Order of Stillwater. A private, clandestine organization that formed in the 1930s, operating in the Great Lakes region. Their goal, according to rumors, was the preservation and control of knowledge. Specifically, artifacts, documents, and events that didn't fit official records. They believed that some truths were too powerful to be public. They operated in secret, funded by unknown sources. And according to one entry in the book, their activities included land acquisition, excavation of private property, and containment of anomalous history. Eliot's hands went cold. His land. His barn. His grandfather's silence. It wasn't paranoia. It was protection. Gerald had been hiding something from them. Something they wanted. Something they might still want. On his way back home, Eliot passed the property line. The same car from before was there again. This time, the window rolled down. A man inside. Sunglasses. No smile. He didn't get out. Just watched. Eliot stopped his truck, stepped out, and walked toward him. The car peeled away before he could speak. But the message was clear. He wasn't just digging up the past anymore. He was trespassing on something someone else still believed belonged to them. And now they knew his name. By the fourth day, Eliot Brandt had stopped asking if something was wrong. Now he only wondered how deep it went. He couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. The farm chores were falling behind, but none of that mattered. Not when a decades-old secret had risen from the ground like a ghost with unfinished business. He kept thinking about Evelyn's letter. About the child named Samuel. About the brass key with the strange symbol, and the name written on that second box. His name. Something had been hidden for him. Left behind. Not by accident, but by design. He knew the only way to find the answers was to go deeper. Literally. The map. The compass. The key. They all pointed to the same place. A narrow stretch of woods beyond the cornfields, past the barbed fence that hadn't been touched in years. He'd ignored that area for decades. Too rocky. Too wild. But now it felt like it had been waiting for him. That morning, Eliot packed a flashlight, gloves, a crowbar, and the 2 keys. He left his phone at home. No GPS. No signal. Just instinct and the tools of an old man raised on land and gut feeling. He followed the compass through the trees, stepping over roots and moss-covered stones. Every few minutes, he'd stop and look around. Not because he was lost, but because he felt watched. Like the woods had eyes. Like his footsteps weren't the first ones here. After nearly 2 miles, the compass needle began to twitch again. Not just north, but downward. The same trembling he'd felt near the tree. Then he saw it. Half buried in earth and leaves, a slab of rusted metal. About the size of a cellar door. Covered in vines, almost completely camouflaged. He cleared the debris and found a keyhole, rough and corroded. He slid in the brass key from the barn compartment. It clicked, but didn't turn. Then he tried the other. Click. Turn. The door hissed. And lifted. The smell hit him first. Damp. Metallic. Earthy, with a strange chemical sharpness. Below, a steep metal staircase led into darkness. Not a basement. Not a bunker. A vault. Eliot stood there for a long moment, one hand on the open hatch, the other on the flashlight. Every part of him screamed that this was a point of no return. But he was already too far in. He descended. Step by step, the air grew colder. Denser. The flashlight beam flicked across concrete walls lined with metal pipes. This wasn't a random hole in the ground. It was constructed. Purposeful. At the bottom, a long corridor stretched out. Smooth cement. Dust everywhere. On the wall, faint markings. A symbol. The same one from the compass. The Order of Stillwater had been here. He moved forward. The corridor opened into a chamber. Crates. Cabinets. Files. Old equipment covered in tarps. In the center of the room, a desk. On it, a journal. Leather-bound. With a single name carved into it. Gerald Brandt. Eliot opened it with shaking hands. The first pages were dull. Crop rotations. Weather patterns. Livestock notes. But as he flipped through, the entries changed. April 7th, 1951. They came again today. Not from the government. Something else. They want the artifact. I told them I buried it. But I didn't. I couldn't. It's still here. It has to be. June 3rd, 1952. I watched Evelyn leave. Took Samuel with her. I told her it was safer. I lied. I didn't want her to see what I've become. This place changes a man. Holding secrets that don't belong to you does something to your soul. November 19th, 1953. They know about Eliot. I see it in their eyes. They don't want the land. They want the bloodline. Whatever was buried, it was never about the object. It's about who protects it. I'm tired. I don't know how much longer I can keep this from him. The pages stopped there. Eliot sat down, the journal open on his lap, his breath shaking. Everything he knew about his life was wrong. Gerald wasn't just a bitter old man. He was a guardian, a keeper of something powerful enough that secret groups would circle like vultures for generations. But what was the artifact? And more importantly, where was it now? He looked around the chamber. There were blueprints. Maps. old newspaper clippings. One in particular caught his eye. Unknown explosion near Stillwater River, 1944. Locals report lights in the sky. He flipped the paper over. A sketch of a round object. Smooth. Metallic. Marked with symbols he didn't recognize. Another article. 3 men missing after dig in northern Wisconsin. No bodies recovered. And then, a photograph. Black and white. The same men from the car watching him. Or their fathers, maybe. The same sunglasses. The same blank expressions. Standing outside what looked like an excavation site. And behind them, buried halfway in the ground. A large, circular object. Just like the sketch. This was no heirloom. This was something else. Something buried in his family's soil before Eliot was even born. And now the order wanted it back. He turned off the flashlight. Total silence. Total dark. And for the first time, Eliot understood. He wasn't protecting a secret anymore. He was the secret. Eliot didn't move for a long time. He sat in the dark, surrounded by secrets carved into concrete. The journal clutched in his hands. The truth heavy in his chest. This wasn't a family mystery anymore. It wasn't about inheritance or regret. This was about something older. Something powerful. Something that men in black cars would kill to retrieve. He turned the flashlight back on. The beam caught on a cabinet in the corner, padlocked, sealed tight. On the front, the same triangle symbol burned into the wood. The order had marked it. That meant whatever was inside, they hadn't taken it. Not yet. Eliot reached into his jacket, pulled out the smaller brass key. The one that hadn't fit any door until now. He slid it into the lock. It turned with a crack. Inside, there was no artifact. Just paper. Drawings. Diagrams. A map. Not a map of the farm. A map of something beneath the farm. Tunnels. Chambers. A single word written at the bottom in his grandfather's hand. Vault. Suddenly, a sound echoed from the corridor behind him. A clank. Then another. Footsteps. Eliot snapped the light off and held his breath. Silence. Then the sound of something metal dragging across cement. He backed toward the stairs, slow, quiet, staying in the shadows. He'd made a mistake coming here alone. He needed to get out. Now. At the base of the stairwell, he stopped. The hatch was closed. He hadn't closed it. He knew he hadn't closed it. Panic rose in his chest. He shoved against the door. It didn't budge. Locked from the outside. Someone was up there. He turned, flashlight off, moving silently back through the chamber. He needed another way out. According to the map, there was a secondary exit. Deeper into the tunnels. A maintenance shaft, maybe. He took the map. The journal. The photos. Everything he could carry. And he ran. The tunnels were narrow. Low. Covered in vines and rot. It smelled like time had given up trying to preserve anything down here. Every step echoed. Every breath felt louder than thunder. He followed the markings, guided by instinct more than light. Turn left. Crawl right. Duck low. Through what felt like miles of buried passage. Then air. Fresh, cold air. A narrow shaft. Vertical. Rusted ladder bolted to the side. Eliot climbed. His hands slipped on the rust, his boots scraped metal. But he climbed. At the top, a grate. Old. Heavy. He pushed with all his strength. It gave. He emerged in a clearing near the creek on the north edge of his land, an area no one went to, thick with weeds and wild growth. He stumbled into the daylight, gasping, covered in dust and sweat. But he was alive. And now he knew what they were looking for. Not just what was buried, but who had access to it. Him. Back at the house, Eliot barricaded the doors. He pulled the shades. Locked every window. Something in his chest had changed, an alertness, a readiness. He was no longer just reacting. He was preparing. He laid the maps on the table. Everything pointed to a deeper structure. A vault. Built long before he was born. Possibly even before Gerald took the land. Maybe before the land was ever sold. What if the farm was never just a farm? What if it was chosen? Protected? Preserved? And what was inside that vault? There were notes in the journal. Mentions of a device. Not a weapon. Something described only as the vessel. A container. A keeper. Of what, the journal never said. But Gerald had written about energy. Vibration. A force that didn't belong to this earth. Or at least, not anymore. Eliot tried to reason with himself. Tried to believe this was all some Cold War paranoia. But that didn't explain the photos. The symbols. The men watching his land. The locked hatch. He wasn't dealing with fantasy. He was dealing with something real. And someone else wanted it back. That night, Eliot stayed awake with his shotgun beside him. Not because he expected a break-in, but because he knew they were close. He read the letter from Evelyn again. The woman who left everything behind to protect her child. His father. The man Eliot never got to truly know. And in those words, he heard something he hadn't heard in a long time. Love. Love laced with fear. Sacrifice. She had trusted Gerald to protect it. Whatever it was. And now, without even realizing it, Gerald had passed that burden on to Eliot. He whispered into the empty room, not sure who he was speaking to. Why me? The wind outside answered with a howl. Because some legacies don't ask for your permission. They choose you. And when they do, you either protect them, or you get buried with them. Eliot had lived on that farm for over 60 years. He'd survived storms, droughts, loneliness, and the slow collapse of a life he thought he understood. But nothing, not one moment in all those decades, had shaken him like this. It wasn't just the vault, or the journal, or the map of tunnels stretching beneath his land like veins hiding a buried heart. It was the weight of knowing. Knowing the truth had been just beneath his boots the whole time. Knowing his grandfather had built a life of silence, of hidden doors and broken promises, to protect something Eliot still couldn't fully grasp. And knowing he might be the last person alive who even could. He spent the morning walking the land in silence. No chores. No distractions. Just a slow, deliberate loop of the property, as if trying to understand it all over again. He passed the old scarecrow, half collapsed in the southern field. The broken fence by the east road. The pond where his dog Rusty used to chase ducks. It all felt different now. It felt watched. Back at the house, he checked the mailbox. Inside was a manila envelope. No return address. Inside photos. Of him. Recent ones. Walking. Digging. Unlocking the hatch. Even one of him asleep in his chair, taken through the window. A note written in block letters was paper-clipped to the last photo. You have something that doesn't belong to you. That was it. No name. No signature. Just a threat. He burned the photos in the kitchen sink. Watched the edges curl, watched his own face blacken and twist in the flames. Then he pulled every curtain shut, unplugged every phone, and gathered everything he'd found, maps, journals, letters, drawings. He needed to make a plan. Because now he understood. This wasn't just about discovery. It was about survival. He took the files back down into the underground vault, locking the hatch behind him. If they wanted the truth, they'd have to crawl through the dirt to get it. He spent the night reading every page Gerald had written. There were hundreds. Some dates were missing. Others had been blacked out. Entire entries had been torn from the journal. But what remained was enough. Eliot pieced together a timeline. It started in 1943. A noise in the woods. A light in the sky. A crash. And then silence. The next day, Gerald found the object. Not large. Not dangerous. But strange. Smooth, cold, impossible to break. Symbols carved into its surface. It wasn't from any military project. It wasn't Russian. It wasn't American. It wasn't from here. Gerald buried it. He tried to forget it. But they didn't let him. The Order of Stillwater appeared 3 months later. They didn't ask. They knew. Gerald never wrote what the object did. Maybe he didn't understand it himself. But one thing was clear. It did something. It responded. Not to machines. Not to tools. To people. To specific bloodlines. And that was when Eliot felt the chill in his chest return. They weren't just watching him. They were waiting for him. Waiting to see if he could do what Gerald never dared to try. Activate it. He shut the journal. The next morning, the power to the house was cut. Phone lines too. The generator in the shed had been sabotaged. The gas line sliced clean. That afternoon, a car passed slowly down the road, stopped at the edge of the property, then backed away before Eliot could get the license plate. They were moving in. Closer. He went into town that evening to pick up supplies, flashlights, batteries, fuel. But as soon as he walked into the general store, he knew something was off. People avoided his eyes. The clerk handed him his change with a stiff, forced smile. They knew. Or at least they'd been told something. Misinformation, maybe. The order didn't need to prove anything. Just plant doubt. Just make Eliot the story no one wanted to be part of. He wasn't just a farmer anymore. He was a threat. A liability. And liabilities tend to disappear. He drove home in silence, headlights cutting through the early dusk. Halfway down the gravel road to the farm, he spotted something just off the path. A tire. Then another. His truck slowed. 2 more tires, fresh tracks in the dirt, leading off into the trees. Someone had driven onto his land. Recently. He stopped the truck and killed the engine. Listened. Nothing but the creak of trees and the distant buzz of insects. But he knew. He felt them. Somewhere out there, in the dark, the watchers had stepped out of the shadows. He wasn't alone on his land anymore. And whatever came next, he would have to face it alone. Eliot Brandt had never been a man who asked for trouble. But trouble had come anyway. It came quietly in the form of a box. Then a map. Then a voice from the past. Now it walked in shadows at the edge of his land, watched him through glass, and waited for him to blink. But Eliot wasn't blinking anymore. For the first time in his life, he saw the world for what it really was, layers of silence, built by men like his grandfather, upheld by lies and protected by people who no longer existed. Except for him. He was the last link in the chain. The only one left who could protect the thing buried beneath the farm, and finish what Gerald started. But Eliot also understood something else now. This wasn't about the object. It was about the bloodline. His bloodline. That's why the Order had watched his father. That's why Evelyn had fled. That's why Gerald buried it so deep, with so many layers of secrets wrapped around it that not even time had been able to tear them free. They weren't just guarding a secret. They were guarding him. Eliot opened the journal again, flipping to the final pages. In one entry, Gerald wrote, "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't finish it. I was weak. I was scared. I watched them break the others, men stronger than me. I thought I could wait them out. Thought they'd disappear. But they didn't. They're patient. More patient than I ever was. But they don't understand one thing, blood remembers. Eliot, you have to decide if you'll forget like I did. Or if you'll become what I couldn't." That entry hit Eliot like a hammer to the chest. It wasn't just a confession. It was a torch being passed. And Eliot, quiet, weathered, forgotten, was holding the flame now. So he did what he always did when the world started to fall apart. He worked. He went to the barn and pulled every tool that still functioned. Reinforced the doors. Nailed boards across the windows. Cleared every room in the farmhouse and turned it into a fortress. Not because he expected a war, but because he knew one was coming. He installed motion detectors along the fence line. Set up trail cams in the woods. Carried the compass and the smaller key on a chain around his neck. And most importantly, he sealed the hatch to the underground vault with a welding torch. Not forever. Just until he was ready to go back down. Until he knew no one else could. That night, the wind screamed against the walls of the house like it wanted in. But Eliot didn't flinch. He sat in the living room with the shotgun across his knees, and the journal open on the coffee table. He was starting to memorize the entries. The dates. The fears. The decisions that had led to this moment. He knew now that the artifact wasn't just powerful. It was reactive. It responded to emotional frequency, to intention. Gerald had never dared to use it. But Eliot suspected that was why the Order had never taken it. Maybe it couldn't be taken. Maybe it had to be awakened. And maybe it only answered to those it chose. Which meant it had chosen him. Sometime before dawn, he heard a sound. Soft. Careful. Boots on gravel. Not animals. Not wind. People. He slipped out the back door and crept around the side of the house. The moon was full, the yard cast in silver and shadow. At the tree line, 3 figures. Dark coats. Hoods. Flashlights low. They weren't approaching. Just watching. One of them pointed toward the house. Eliot raised his rifle. Didn't speak. Didn't move. The 3 figures held their position for a moment longer, then disappeared into the trees like ghosts melting into the dark. They didn't want a confrontation. Not yet. But they wanted him to know they were close. That they could reach him whenever they chose. The next day, Eliot drove into town one last time. He filled up the truck. Bought seeds he wouldn't plant. Canned goods he might not eat. And wrote a letter. Not for the police. Not for the news. For his son. He hadn't spoken to David in 6 years. Not since the funeral. They didn't leave things angry. Just unfinished. Drifting. But now Eliot realized the cycle would never end unless someone broke it. He mailed the letter with a trembling hand. Inside, he didn't talk about vaults or maps or mysterious orders. He just said what he'd never been able to say out loud. I was afraid to be the man I needed to be. I hope one day you'll understand why. I love you. I always did. He didn't expect a reply. But he hoped for one. Then he went home, locked the gate, and waited. Not in fear, but in readiness. Because Eliot finally knew who he was. Not just a farmer. Not just a man with regrets. But a guardian. The last Brandt standing between what was buried and those who would use it for reasons no one was meant to understand. And he would hold the line, even if it broke him. Time moved differently now. Not in hours or days, but in pulses. In the hum of the wind. In the silence between footfalls. In the flicker of lights that once stayed steady. Eliot felt it all. The slow collapse of the world he knew and the rise of something waiting underneath it. He didn't know what day it was anymore. But he knew something was coming. And it wasn't just them. It was it. The artifact. The vessel. Whatever had fallen from the sky 80 years ago and embedded itself in the soil of his family's land. It was no longer content to be hidden. And Eliot could feel it, like a pressure building beneath his feet. The farm groaned with it. The trees bent differently in the wind. The animals were quieter. Even the air felt thinner. He hadn't slept in 2 nights. Not because of fear, but because of certainty. It was almost time. There were things he still didn't understand. Huge, terrifying things. But the pieces were finally clicking into place. The map, the compass, the vault, the order, the bloodline. It was all one design. Not coincidence. Not misfortune. A blueprint. And Eliot Brandt had been standing in the middle of it his entire life. He spent the day checking his perimeter. Every sensor still intact. Every camera still transmitting. He knew it wouldn't stop them when they finally made their move, but it might buy him time. Time to do what his grandfather never could. Then, just after sunset, something changed. The compass. It had been sitting still for days. But now it moved slow at first, then locked hard in a new direction. Not north. Down. Again. But not toward the vault. Toward the barn. The half-burned structure he hadn't entered since the first discovery. The one where he'd found the first letter. The place where it all began. He grabbed his flashlight, the keys, and the compass. No gun this time. He didn't know why, but it felt wrong. As if whatever this was, this final step, violence would only make it worse. He walked through the dark, boots crunching frost-covered grass. The barn loomed like a skeleton in the field, blackened wood stretching into the purple night sky. The door creaked open, just like before. But this time, it didn't feel abandoned. It felt prepared. He stepped inside. The same musty smell. The same silence. But something else. A low hum. Faint. Vibrational. Like a tuning fork buried beneath the earth. The compass trembled in his hand. He followed it to the back wall. The same place he'd dug before. But now something had shifted. The dirt was disturbed again. Recently. He knelt. Dug with his hands. And uncovered a hatch. Smaller than the other. Older. Reinforced metal with no visible handle. Just a shallow indentation. Circular. He reached into his coat and pulled out the pendant. The one Evelyn had worn in the photograph. It was the only object he hadn't yet figured out. The only thing that hadn't made sense. Until now. He placed it into the indentation. It clicked. The hatch opened inward. A stairwell descended into darkness. He hesitated only once. Then stepped in. The air inside was colder than any cellar. It wasn't natural. It felt preserved, untouched. The stairs wound tightly, every step groaning under his weight. When he reached the bottom, the passage opened into a chamber unlike the first. No files. No cabinets. Just one object. Suspended in midair. A sphere. Silver black. Silent. Rotating slightly on its own axis, glowing faintly from within. And in that moment, Eliot felt everything. The sorrow of his grandfather. The fear in Evelyn's voice. The reason they ran. The reason they hid. Because this wasn't just a secret. It was a decision. The vessel didn't glow brighter. It didn't make a sound. But it knew him. He could feel it, scanning something in him that wasn't physical. Like it recognized the lineage. The legacy. The memory of Gerald's hands and Evelyn's voice and the bloodline that had protected it for generations. Then the room shifted. The walls trembled. The hum grew louder. Outside, a siren. Not from town. From the trees. A flare lit the sky, red then green. They had arrived. He ran back up the stairs, sealing the hatch behind him. His fingers were shaking. Not from fear. From purpose. Because now he knew. They weren't just coming for the artifact. They were coming to activate it. And they needed him alive. But they wouldn't need him for long. Back in the farmhouse, he gathered everything, maps, journals, keys, and placed them in a bag. If he was going to disappear, the truth wouldn't. He scribbled one last note. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't stop them. But maybe you still can. Follow the compass. Trust the blood. Protect the silence. He sealed the bag and tucked it beneath the floorboards. Then he stood in the doorway of his home one last time, looking out across the fields he had walked his entire life. The fields that had hidden something the world was never meant to touch. He could hear engines now. They were closer than ever. And this time they weren't just watching. They were coming. They came without warning. No sirens. No lights. Just the sound of tires crunching gravel and boots hitting dirt. Silent professionals, trained not to make noise unless it served a purpose. And their purpose tonight was clear. Eliot Brandt stood at the front porch of his farmhouse as 6 men in dark tactical gear approached from the treeline. Their faces were hidden. No insignias. No names. Just shadows with eyes. He didn't raise his hands. Didn't run. He simply stood there, holding nothing. One of the men stepped forward, voice muffled behind a black mask. You've been protecting something that doesn't belong to you. Eliot's voice was calm. It was never mine. But it's not yours either. The man paused, then said, We don't want to hurt you. Eliot gave a dry, bitter laugh. That's the first lie. The men didn't argue. They spread out, forming a loose semicircle around the house. Inside, beneath the floorboards, the bag with the journals and maps waited. His final attempt to ensure the story wouldn't die if he did. Eliot turned and walked back into the house, closing the door behind him. He didn't lock it. What good would it do now? Instead, he went to the kitchen and sat in his father's old chair. The same chair Gerald used to read in. The same one where he himself had held his son, decades ago, when the world still felt simple. He waited. And the door opened. The man from before entered, slower this time, as if Eliot's quiet had unnerved him. You know what we're looking for, the man said. Eliot nodded. But I don't think you know what you're looking for. The man stepped closer. You think this is about history? About memory? This is about control. Containment. There are forces you couldn't begin to understand. Eliot stood. You're wrong. He held up the compass. It was spinning wildly now. No direction. No still point. It doesn't want you. The man stepped forward, reaching for a small black device clipped to his belt. Eliot didn't wait. He ran. Out the back door, through the shed, across the field. He didn't need light. He knew the path. The barn was up ahead, black, skeletal, waiting. Behind him, shouting. Flashlight swinging. Footsteps chasing. He reached the barn, tore open the door, and pulled the hidden hatch. The pendant was already in his hand. It clicked into place. The floor opened. He dove in. As the hatch slammed shut above him, he slid down the winding stairwell, bruising his shoulder against the narrow walls, heart pounding like a war drum. At the bottom, the chamber. The sphere. It was glowing brighter now. Not white. Blue. Deep, radiant, pulsing like a heart. Eliot stepped forward. The air buzzed. The hum filled his ears, louder than before. He raised his hand, and the object responded. A light stretched out from it, connecting with his palm. No heat. No pain. Just a sensation like recognition. Behind him, the hatch burst open. The men poured in, shouting orders, weapons drawn. The leader screamed, Step away! But the sphere pulsed again, and everything changed. The room filled with sound. Not noise, voices. Echoes of voices, layered upon each other. Gerald. Evelyn. Eliot's father. People Eliot had never met. Memories not his own, pouring through the walls. And then images. Not on screens. In the air. Projecting from the sphere. Moments frozen in time. The night of the crash. Gerald holding the object for the first time. Evelyn crying as she left the farm, clutching her son. A young boy, Eliot, playing in the fields, unaware of the watchers in the trees. And then the others. The order. Meetings in candlelit rooms. Documents signed in blood. Oaths sworn. Faces cold with conviction. Their goal wasn't discovery. It was silence. Because the artifact didn't hold danger. It held truth. Truth about where it came from. Truth about what it knew. And truth about what humans were never meant to forget. The sphere glowed again, and Eliot finally understood. This wasn't a weapon. It was a witness. It had recorded everything since the moment it crashed to Earth. Not just events, but emotions. Motives. Regret. Hope. Love. Pain. It had chosen Gerald. And now, it had chosen Eliot. The men behind him froze, unable to move. Not because of the light, but because of what they were seeing. The The truth was showing itself to them, stripping away decades of secrecy in a matter of seconds. The leader dropped his gun. "What is this?" Eliot didn't answer. He didn't need to. The light faded. The images dissolved. Silence returned. But it was not empty. It was complete. The men stood in place, stunned. For the first time, they looked less like enforcers and more like children caught in a story they didn't understand. Eliot turned to face them. "You came here to contain something you couldn't control. Now you've seen it. You can't unsee it. So you have a choice." No one moved. No one spoke. He walked past them, climbed the stairs, and stepped back into the night. Alone. But not afraid. The stars above were clearer now. Brighter. And for the first time in a very long time, Eliot Brandt felt like he finally understood the land he'd spent his whole life standing on. It had been waiting. Not for an ending. But for him. The next morning, the fields were still. Not quiet. Still. There's a difference. Quiet is what you get when the world takes a breath. Stillness is what comes after something irreversible. Eliot stood alone at the edge of the woods, looking out over the property that had once been nothing more than rows of soil, a barn, and a story no one wanted to talk about. But now it was more than land. It was proof. The artifact was back in its chamber, untouched, sealed beneath the earth once again. But this time, not hidden out of fear. Guarded with intention. The men from the Order never came back. They didn't speak. Didn't fight. After what they saw, they simply left. Because once you see truth that raw, you can't weaponize it. You can only carry it. Eliot hadn't slept. His body was exhausted, but his mind was wide open, burning like a wire suddenly overloaded with current. He walked the property again that day, not to patrol it, but to feel it. The land was different now. Lighter somehow. As if it had been holding its breath for decades and had finally exhaled. By the creek, he found something he hadn't noticed before. An old tree stump, weathered and smooth but carved. Not names. Not symbols. A message. 3 words. Keep it quiet. His grandfather's handwriting. Burned into the wood with a knife. A reminder or a warning? That was the question Eliot wrestled with now. Because he held something inside him that no man was ever meant to hold. A story that could rewrite what the world believed about its own history. A story that could bring answers to questions people had been asking since the dawn of time. But also, a story that, if told, could unleash chaos. Governments would come. Scientists. War machines with curious faces and sharp teeth. And the peace the artifact carried, the wisdom embedded inside it, would be stripped down, broken apart, and sold back to humanity one shattered theory at a time. So Eliot made a choice. He buried the hatch again, welded it shut, covered it with earth and stone and silence. The object would remain where it had always been. Beneath the ground. Beneath the noise. Beneath the lies. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood what it meant to protect something, even when the world might never thank you for it. Later that evening, a letter arrived in the mailbox. Postmarked from out of state. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. It read, "You were right. Some truths belong to the soil. But not all of them. When the time is right, others will come. And they'll need you. Until then, we'll be watching. Not as enemies, but as witnesses." No name. Just a symbol at the bottom. The triangle within the circle. But now, Eliot didn't see it as a threat. He saw it as a promise. That night, for the first time in weeks, he sat on the front porch. The stars were out again, scattered across the sky like clues. The breeze was cool, but not cold. The land was breathing again. Not hiding. He sipped coffee from a chipped mug, listened to the wind, and thought about his grandfather. He thought about Evelyn and Samuel, and the little boy he used to be, chasing grasshoppers in these fields, completely unaware of what lay beneath his feet. That boy was gone. But the man was finally whole. He no longer felt like a keeper of someone else's secret. He felt like the ending of a story that had been waiting a very long time to be written. But even endings have echoes. And Eliot knew the world hadn't finished with him yet. Because stories like this don't really end. They rest. Until someone else hears the call. Until someone else finds the map. Until someone else feels the weight of silence and chooses to follow it anyway. He glanced at the compass on the porch railing. It had finally stopped spinning. But it still pointed somewhere. And Eliot knew that meant one thing. The story was at peace. But the journey? The journey was only just beginning. Seasons passed. Winters came and went. Crops rose and fell. The days grew quieter. Fewer birds, fewer storms, fewer interruptions. But the land stayed the same. And so did Eliot Brandt. The lines on his face grew deeper. His hands a little slower. His steps more measured. But his presence never weakened. He remained. Not as a prisoner of the past, but as its steward. Neighbors saw less of him in town. People whispered about the strange things that had once happened on that farm. The cars, the disappearances, the questions that were never answered. But time has a way of dulling sharp memories. The rumors softened into folklore, then into silence. And that was exactly how Eliot wanted it. Because the truth wasn't meant for everyone, only for those who chose to listen for it. And the land, if you knew how to listen, was always speaking. Eliot spent more time walking the perimeter now, not to guard, but to connect. He planted wildflowers where the soil had long gone bare, repaired old fences that no longer served a purpose but deserved care. He mended the porch swing where his father once sat, long before Eliot ever knew what legacy waited for him beneath the surface. Sometimes he'd stop at the edge of the north field and just stand there, eyes fixed on nothing. The trees, the wind, the familiar weight of the past humming in the earth below. There were no more visits from the order. No more black cars. But Eliot never assumed they were gone. He knew better. They weren't finished. They were simply waiting. Just like the artifact. Just like the land. But the difference now was Eliot's peace with it. He no longer feared being the last guardian. He understood it. And with that understanding came a stillness. Not emptiness, not isolation, something stronger. The kind of silence that only exists when everything around it is fully alive. One spring morning, a letter arrived. This time, it wasn't anonymous. It was from his son, David. 3 sentences, handwritten. I got your letter. I don't understand everything. But I'd like to talk. Eliot read those words 3 times before folding the page and sliding it into his shirt pocket. He didn't reply right away. Not because he didn't want to, but because it meant something had shifted. Legacy wasn't ending. It was evolving. And perhaps, one day soon, he would no longer be the only one who knew. Until then, the farm would wait. Like it always had. That evening, he walked back to the barn. The one that had once terrified him. The one that now felt like a cathedral of memory. He stood at the doorway, one hand on the frame, and looked out across the fields. Golden light poured over the soil like forgiveness. In that moment, Eliot didn't think about secrets or conspiracies or threats. He thought about Gerald. A man who had lived a life of guilt, but who'd tried, quietly, stubbornly, to make it right. He thought about Evelyn, and her strength to walk away so her son could live free of the weight she carried. He thought about his own mistakes, the distance he had placed between himself and the world, and how somehow all of it had brought him here, to this peace, this purpose, this strange, sacred story buried under Wisconsin dirt. He walked into the barn and climbed to the loft, the same place where he'd once found the first box. He sat there as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the beams, making the dust glow like fireflies frozen in time. And he listened, to the wood creaking beneath him, to the wind in the rafters, to the heartbeat of a world that no longer felt so mysterious. Not because the questions had been answered, but because he'd stopped needing them to be. Some truths, Eliot realized, aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be carried, lived with, passed down not as facts, but as presence, as the quiet understanding that we are all part of something bigger, stranger, older than we'll ever fully grasp. The artifact remained silent. The land remained still. And Eliot, for the first time in his life, was okay with both. Because now, he understood what Gerald had written in the margins of that old journal, in handwriting so small it could have been missed entirely. The land remembers, even if we forget. So now you've heard it. Not just a story, but a legacy. A buried truth hidden under decades of soil, silence, and sacrifice. A tale of a farmer who followed a map and ended up rediscovering not only his family's secrets, but himself. And maybe, just maybe, something far greater. This wasn't a story about aliens, or government cover-ups, or glowing orbs beneath barns. It was about choices. The ones we inherit, the ones we ignore, and the ones we're finally brave enough to make when no one else will. Eliot Brandt didn't go looking for mystery. He wasn't chasing glory or revenge. He wasn't trying to solve the great questions of the universe. He was just a man, tired, wounded, quiet, who heard a whisper in the dark and chose not to walk away. That whisper didn't just come from his grandfather's map, or the compass, or the strange hum beneath his feet. It came from the past. from his blood, from the land itself. And the truth is we all hear it, in one way or another. Every single one of us stands on something. Soil, history, stories we weren't told, pain we didn't witness, but still feel. You might not have an artifact buried under your home. You might not discover a secret organization watching your every move. But chances are, you have a choice to make. Just like Eliot did. A choice between forgetting or remembering. Between turning away or digging deeper. Between silence or legacy. Because here's the part no one wants to say out loud. The world will keep spinning, whether we chase the truth or not. But it spins differently depending on who's holding the map. And right now, that person might be you. Maybe you're holding on to a story someone else buried. Maybe you're standing on ground that's been asking you to listen. Maybe the mystery you're meant to solve isn't out there, in some distant place, but right beneath your feet. In your family. In your history. In the things you were always told not to ask about. So ask. Listen. Dig. Because the land remembers. And the moment you do, so will you. If Eliot's story teaches us anything, it's that silence may feel safe, but it rarely leads to peace. Peace comes from courage. Courage to face what's uncomfortable. To forgive what was broken. To carry what others couldn't. And to leave behind not fear, but truth. So now we ask you, what story are you standing on? What truth has been whispering in your ear? What legacy will you leave behind when your map runs out of pages? Don't answer now. Sit with it. Walk your own field. Stare out your own window. Read the letter you never opened. Make the call you've put off for years. Because maybe the map isn't lost. Maybe it's just waiting for you to notice. Before we close this chapter, we want to hear from you. What lesson did you learn from Eliot's story that you believe is essential to the human experience? Was it about forgiveness? Family? Truth? Purpose? Drop your reflections in the comments below. We want to create a space where people don't just hear stories, but connect with them. And with each other. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or made you see your own life just a little differently, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel, Wisconsin Farm Tales. We bring stories like this to light, not because they're strange or mysterious, but because they're true in the ways that matter most. Thank you for watching. And remember, even when the world forgets, the land remembers. And so can you.